Have you ever heard someone say, "Oh, that is a great vintage," or "Oh, that was a great year for wine"? Today we are going to be explaining what makes a good vintage for wine from which region, so stay tuned.
Hello everybody, welcome back to corkandjava.com. I am Billy and this is Bryn, and we all know you're supposed to enjoy and get fascination and even the little things in life that most people take for granted. So we're here to expand and enrich your experience with all of your favorite beverages through coffee and wine, reviews, and how-tos. So if that sounds interesting to you and you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button down below and the little bell so you're notified when our future videos come out. All right, we're talking about vintage today and what makes a good year versus a bad year for wine. All right, so vintage refers to the year in which the grapes were harvested for that particular wine. And there's a lot of things in the growing year, mostly the weather, that correlate to if the wine was good that year or not so good, if it ages well or doesn't age well. And there's also some factors like how old the vines are. Like an older vine, like you might have seen Old Vines Infidels, they have roots that go very deep, and so there's less variation in those wines year to year of what the grapes produce. It's typically a smaller yield, less product than younger grapes, but they're going to be more consistent year to year. Where newer vines, they're going to vary year to year based on different weather conditions. So should we go over some certain tips to tell whether a vintage was a good year or a bad year based on weather in that particular region?
Sounds good.
All right.
All right, so the first weather indicator that he mentioned was rain.
Yeah, so rain plays a big factor in the crop, obviously. So rainy years increase rot potential and also disease potential. And overall, if it's like super rainy that year, it can just reduce the quality of the grapes overall. And if it rains like right before the harvest, the grapes actually are very saturated with water. It produces, less acidic wine, as well as the alcohol content, because the sugar ratio in the grape is going to be less. So you're going to have usually lower ABV levels as well. So overall, it's going to be less concentration of flavor and more uninteresting characteristics in the wine overall if it rained right beforehand.
So what if it's a really dry year?
So a really dry year, the vines are going to produce less. So you're going to have less quantity, but you can still get very good quality grapes out of a dry year.
Mm-hmm.
But you're sacrificing quantity, so it's going to be yet less yield. But the quality can still be very good, which could lead to a very good year as far as taste of wine. And because the quantity's low, it's going to raise the price because the supply is also down, and the quality is still going to be typically pretty good. So the demand is going to be high.
All right, so we've done wet year and dry year. What about a hot year?
So a hot year, if it's sustained in the mid to upper 90s for extended period of time, it's going to stress out the vines and it's going to produce less yield. And you're going to get some high ABV wines, but you're going to get tannin structures that are off. It's going to be like less tannin structures and often high acidic wines too as well. I'm sorry, less acidity than years that aren't quite as hot.
All right, what happens with a frost that occurs late into spring?
So a late frost, it's going to kill a lot of the buds that are starting to produce. So it's going to decrease the amount of wine, cause unevenness in the vines. And overall, it's asking for basically perfect weather for the fall season to recover.
Okay, and what about severe hailstorms?
Hail pretty much is awful for all types of farming
Crops,
and crops. And this happened recently in Texas. They had a lot of hail. from one of my friends who lives there was saying it ruined a lot of their wine crops out there. But yeah, it basically, the big impact of hail is it's gonna strip and kill a lot of the grapes. It's gonna knock a lot of the grapes off. It's gonna ruin a lot of grapes. So basically it's reducing the yield of your harvest. But that's the main thing about hail, really.
All right, and what about an early frost in fall?
So that pretty much stuns the growth of any future growth of the grape. And if that happens too early, you can get very high acid levels in the grapes that weren't intended to be there. So that's one of the factors of an early frost in the fall. So basically, from what I told you about weather, what makes the perfect vintage for a wine?
So it has to be sunny, but not too hot and not too cold, and not too wet, but not too dry.
Yep, it's pretty much the Goldilocks. It's got to be right there in the middle to be that perfect growing
Just
season.
Right.
And I think if you get a lot of good rain early on, and then you get some nice off and on rain, good mixture in the middle of the summer, and towards the end when you harvest, if you get a good week or two of no rain, dry right before harvest, I think that's the perfect combination, because it's going to be very concentrated grapes. You're going to have a good yield at that point because you had nice rain early on in the season, and pretty temperate temperatures. You don't want to be too hot or too cold during the middle of the summer in the growing season. And then that last stretch before harvest, if that's dry, you're gonna increase the character and sugar levels in those grapes, and that's gonna be perfect if it hasn't rained right before the harvest.
Yeah, it's like everything in moderation. Like that's the goal.
And if they can go as late as possible too in the season, I think that helps, because the earlier they pick it, the less mature the grapes really are. And I think the more, I don't know, like a Vino Verde like we had, that's a pick very early, and it's super light, super crisp. It's great for that style, but most other varietals and grapes, I think they benefit from going almost as long as possible on the vine. So if you can get that kind of extended warm late fall into the harvest season and dry the last few weeks before harvest, is perfect vintage for grapes.
Okay, so comment below if you have had a wine from a certain region in a certain year that you really enjoyed. We'd love to know what it is.
Yeah, and also let us know if you've experienced a really good or really bad season in your area, if you're in a wine region at all. Like I said, my friend in Texas, they had last year a lot of hailstorms right before the harvest, which really ruined a lot of crops. So yeah, let us know if your area experienced anything like that, and leave a comment down below. And also make sure you check us out online. We got a Facebook group, Cork and Java, a Twitter handle @CorkJava, and a Pinterest page, Cork and Java. So check us out there. And until next time, guys, bottoms up.